After 40 years of peace, brought by Deborah's brave leadership, the Israelites slipped back into bad habits, worshiping the false god Baal, a disobedience that didn't go unnoticed by the Lord. As a consequence, every year, just as the crops were ready to harvest, a terrifying sight appeared: the armies of the Midianites. Darker than the fiercest storm, they swept through Israel, leaving nothing but ruin, despair, and grief in their wake. Forced to hide their food and work in secret, the Israelites lived in fear of being discovered. Little did they know, a hero was among them, one who would rise unexpectedly to lead just 300 warriors in a bold plan to save Israel. This is the Bible story of Gideon. On this particular day, Gideon was in a wine press, but not for its intended use. He was there to thresh wheat, a task usually done in the open, but now hidden away for fear of Midianite raiders who might steal his harvest. Perhaps, as he worked, his mind wandered to darker times, recalling his brothers, victims to these very raiders. The Bible doesn't detail his thoughts at that moment, but his later actions hint at a heart heavy with loss and a burning desire for justice. This ordinary day took a wild turn. Suddenly, an angel materialized before him, lighting up the dim space. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." The words struck Gideon more than the supernatural sight of the angel. The term mighty warrior echoed louder in his ears than the miraculous appearance. It was almost laughable. "Excuse me, my lord," Gideon responded, his voice tinged with doubt. "If the Lord is really with us, then why is all this happening? Where are all the wonders our ancestors told us about?" His question wasn't just curiosity. It was a glimpse into his turmoil. Being called a mighty warrior hit a nerve, tapping into his deepest insecurities and the despair he felt over his people's suffering. How could he, of all people, be part of God's grand plan? The angel didn't flinch at Gideon's skepticism. Instead, he laid out a direct challenge. "Use the strength you already possess to deliver Israel from the Midianites. Believe it or not, I am the one sending you." This call to action wasn't just about delivering Israel. It was about avenging his family and restoring peace to his people's lives. The charge sent a shiver down Gideon's spine. Respect and fear mingled within him as he faced this celestial messenger. Despite his nerves, Gideon dared to ask for more. "I'm sorry, Lord," he said, his voice steady but filled with apprehension. He carefully arranged an offering of meat and bread on a rock, his hands trembling slightly. "If I am truly to lead, please, I need a sign that you are with me." Gideon needed to know he wasn't stepping into the dark alone. As soon as he finished speaking, fire leaped from the rock and consumed the offering, showing Gideon that God was indeed with him. His doubt disappeared, replaced by a strong, unshakable belief. Now, it was Gideon's turn to prove his worthiness for the task. Before delivering the people of Israel from the oppression of the sword, Gideon needed to free them from another form of oppression that they had imposed on their own souls: idolatry. For this, the Lord had a specific mission for him. God commanded Gideon to destroy the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. These were symbols of the community's worship of foreign gods, which directly contradicted the worship of the Lord. Given the high risks, Gideon chose to carry out God's command under the cover of darkness. He took 10 of his servants and completed the task at night, demonstrating both prudence and courage. They demolished the altar, cut down the Asherah pole, and used the wood from the pole to build a new altar to the Lord on consecrated ground. The next morning, when the people of the town discovered what Gideon had done, they were outraged. They demanded that Joash, Gideon's father, surrender Gideon so they could execute him for his sacrilegious act. However, Joash defended his son by challenging the accusers. If Baal was truly a god, why couldn't he defend his own altar? This argument resonated with the protesters. The flaws in their beliefs were now evident, and their misguided faith began to crumble. As their allegiance to Baal wavered, their admiration for Gideon grew. The bold hero who had dared to defy and deliver them from their false god. Now filled with the Spirit of the Lord and ready to deliver his people, Gideon took up an ancient horn and blew it as a trumpet, signaling a call to arms against the Midianites. Gideon's call resonated far and wide. Men from every corner of Israel heeded it. As the crowd grew, a heavy sense of responsibility weighed on Gideon's shoulders. Under the veil of night, as the camp quieted down, Gideon sought solitude to lay before the Lord his fears and hopes. Before engaging in battle, Gideon requested a sign involving a fleece of wool. "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you have said." And God answered, giving Gideon a reassuring sign. Now it was time for Gideon to demonstrate his faith. God issued a sobering command. "There are too many men, Gideon. If I deliver Midian into their hands as they are, Israel will boast against me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" Following God's commands, Gideon stood before his assembled troops, his voice cutting through the quiet murmurs of the men. "The Lord has decreed that our numbers must be reduced. Those who carry fear in their hearts may depart with no shame." The response was immediate. Thousands of footsteps echoed at dawn as those gripped by fear and anxiety gathered their belongings and departed. This mass exodus left a much smaller group, no more than 10,000. Yet, in God's view, the army was still too large. God then instructed Gideon to take his men to the water to drink. This was a test to choose only the most vigilant of them. With the remaining men, Gideon led the way to the nearby stream. "Watch them closely," the Lord had instructed. As they reached the stream, each man's method of drinking became a test of his vigilance and readiness. Most knelt and submerged their faces in the water, but a few scooped it up, keeping their eyes alert and fixed on the surrounding landscape. Gideon observed each one intently. Those few who lapped the water with their hands, their awareness unwavering, were the ones chosen to stay. They numbered no more than 300. At night, Gideon and his small band of 300 men were poised near the Midianite encampment. It was obvious to the minuscule army that a direct confrontation was not possible. They needed a plan. But what logic could possibly lead to a strategy that would work? Gideon turned to God, and the Lord answered, instructing Gideon to go down to the camp to gather intelligence and to receive a divine sign. Under the cloak of night, Gideon and his servant Purah stealthily approached the vast Midianite camp. As they neared the edge of the encampment, Gideon's ears caught the low tones of a Midianite soldier recounting a peculiar dream to his companion. The Midianite vividly described how a barley loaf tumbled into their camp, striking a tent with such force that it collapsed, completely overturned. The listener, intrigued and apprehensive, quickly interpreted the dream. This can only be the sword of Gideon son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. Hearing this, Gideon's spirit soared. The divine assurance he had been seeking was delivered through the enemy's own lips. Overwhelmed with gratitude and confidence, Gideon hurried back to his 300 men. "Arise, for the Lord has handed the Midianite camp over to you," Gideon declared, his voice infused with renewed vigor. His words sliced through the quiet of the night, stirring his small band of men into readiness. Then he laid out his plan, a strategy as unconventional as it was bold. Instead of swords and spears, each man was equipped with a trumpet, an empty jar, and a torch concealed within the jar. Following Gideon's tactical command, the 300 men split into 3 groups, each moving stealthily towards the Midianite camp from different directions. At Gideon's signal, the calm of the night was abruptly shattered. In a coordinated strike, the men broke the jars they carried, unveiling torches that blazed fiercely in the darkness. At the same moment, They blew their trumpets with formidable power. This sudden barrage of light and sound plunged the Midianite camp into chaos. Roused from sleep, the enemy soldiers were seized by a blind panic, mistakenly perceiving the noise and the flickering lights as an attack by an overwhelming force. In their disarray and terror, they turned on each other, striking down their own comrades. Caught in a frenzy of fear and confusion, the Midianites ultimately sealed their defeat with their own hands, sparing Gideon's troops from the need to engage in physical combat. Thus, the battle was won through cunning and bravery, without a fight. As chaos erupted in the Midianite camp under the cover of night, their leaders, Zeba and Zalmunna, panicked and fled. Gideon, driven by a deep-seated determination for justice, pursued them relentlessly. While the text does not detail his thoughts in the heat of the chase, it later reveals that these were the very kings responsible for the deaths of his brothers, adding a profound personal stake to his mission. Driven by a personal vendetta and a fierce desire for justice, Gideon knew what he had to do. This was no longer just about revenge. Capturing these kings was critical to end the threat once and for all, and to prevent any regrouping of the Midianites. As Gideon initiated the chase, his initial success inspired warriors from other tribes to join his ranks, bolstering his force with their renewed faith and added strength. Gideon's forces charged, sending their enemies fleeing toward Jordan. The commanders Oreb and Zeb didn't make it far, captured and swiftly beheaded. But the real chase was for the kings, Zeba and Zalmunna. With the remnants of their army, they darted through hostile towns that refused Gideon aid, a mistake those towns would regret. Gideon, fueled by vengeance and divine support, didn't relent. His men pushed hard, crossing the Jordan in hot pursuit. At Karkor, the trap snapped shut. Only 15,000 Midianite soldiers remained, a shadow of their former might. The kings tried to flee once more in the chaos, but found Gideon's sword instead. Captured, they were dragged back to the very towns that turned Gideon away, their presence a testament to Israel's divine-backed victory. Confronted and defeated, the kings admitted to the murder of Gideon's brothers. This was personal. Gideon called on his son Jether to deliver justice. But the youth faltered, the weight of the moment too great. Seizing the moment, Zeba and Zalmunna taunted, urging Gideon to finish what he started. And so he did. By ending the king's lives, Gideon not only ended the oppression of his people, but also avenged his brothers and fulfilled the mission God had set before him. The nation, overflowing with gratitude and admiration, was ready to crown him as their king. However, Gideon stood firm in his refusal, delivering his memorable declaration. "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Unfortunately, Gideon's noble decision wasn't the best for his nation. In the upcoming videos, we'll see how some of his choices led Israel to spiral back into dark practices. If you enjoyed this content and would like to help improve its quality, please consider joining our membership or becoming a Patreon. Your support means a lot to us. As a patron or member, you'll have the chance to vote and suggest topics for future content. Premium members also have the opportunity to dedicate a story to a loved one. We proudly credit our members in our videos as a token of our gratitude. Thank you so much for your support.